Okay, so now we start getting into the dirty stuff. And this is from Level 2 Professional Course, Lesson 6, Escaping Spirit Traps, the Booklet 6, Lesson 6, and Pathway to Ascension, Volume 1. So we're talking about hostile acts, and we're going to talk about holdouts or holdbacks. And they're kind of different, and some we've kind of gone back and forth at this over the years at the Systemology Society. Some have referred to the hostile acts as harmful acts as opposed to hostile acts. So either way means the same thing. We, at one point, the systemology or utilitarian systemology, there's an entire volume. If you, at some point, start getting into the research volumes behind this from the original Systemology core prior to New Standard Systemology, there's an entire volume titled Way of the Wizard, and it's totally dedicated to the subject of ethics. But now in this present Pathway to Ascension Professional Course series, we're going to simplify the subject and just emphasize only the parts that are very, pertain directly to processing, the systematic processing that's necessary to complete Systemology Level 2. It's not unlike some of the other areas we've been poking at for the last several lessons. This isn't usually an area that seekers really enjoy very much, so we begin to see some of them kind of fall away, fall by the wayside on the pathway around this level of Level 2. So my goal is just to get you through it, especially with this series of lectures and whatnot, and presenting this new standard systemology material. So the development and use of our systemology, our material, these courses, it's possible now at this point, this late in the game of our spiritual existence, because apparently we've only now been able and willing to fully observe and understand the patterns of our thoughts, behaviors, the roles that we play out in each of these consecutive and cumulative lifetimes. And it would seem almost too late in the game, except that we have this now, this entire pathway charted out. So we're able to forge forth. But I would say this is probably the last turning point accessible to spiritual beings that have now reached the point of the human condition. So, and it's at this point too, in processing Level 2, and this may be inherent in the system. It may be that individuals are reactively programmed to essentially back away from these areas enough to not handle them, and therefore further become entrapped in the system. So we're going to be talking about things where it's difficult to face, difficult to confront as it is, and yet without doing so, we restrict ourselves from having total access to not only the knowledge of our own cosmic history, because don't end those abilities, but don't forget that the knowingness, the knowledge also is inherent with the defragmentation. And so the things that we don't want to know about, things that we don't want to think about, areas that we've lost control over, or the ability to handle and what's not, that's all connected on a chain down the road to points where we kind of took the other route or the other way, or decided to not know something farther back on the track, and basically lose control of these entire areas. So in actual truth, although it's easiest to treat what's accessible and what's right in front of someone from this lifetime, as spiritual beings, we've been involved in games of conflict and domination for a very long time. And we've experienced, again, both sides of this. There's pretty much both sides of most everything by this point in our existence. Even if we've blocked out or have chosen not to consider or face this memory. And so But memory exists in sequences and chains, and our unwillingness to confront something, anything, it can block out entire areas of knowingness and ability, and that's one of the reasons we have to systematically approach the mechanisms that are attached to, for example, committing a harmful act, which is to say an action that directly harms someone else, or as we treat in utilitarian systemology, the spheres of existence. The spheres of existence were born out of the idea of utilitarianism. And so this is an important area to process, prior to even, trying to treat any of these higher level considerations or things. And there's also the area of justification that we'll eventually get into. So hostile, harmful acts is the start of a systematic sequence that generally results in fragmentation. First, there's the act or the action itself. Then, of course, the mind naturally considers the motivation for that action and others similar to it, other similar actions. So when, for example, one is struck by another, there's a tendency to want to balance that action, and one considers that they have a motivation to strike back. Now, this seems fairly elementary, but again, systematic, gradual, gradient scale, and eventually this works out to kind of bite us in the butt. So if we extend this example, the individual is likely to claim that the harm that they have done is motivated by the harm that is done to them. So now the alpha spirit begins to postulate this as reality. The mind system follows by correcting its perceptions accordingly, but by this insistence on manifesting a balance of harm, we find the individual getting entangled in a spirit trap that they didn't see coming. Some traditions recognize this as like karma. It's a mechanism that appears to be at play in the universe, but that's, in most cases, however, we're talking about, when someone talks about karma, it's almost like this karma machine that's just kind of shelling something out or so on and so forth. But the actual fact is that, this karma is something we're actually imposing on our own reality. Because don't forget, we've now made a reality agreement that harmful acts have motivation. And our insistence that harm must be balanced then leaves us with our own unmotivated harmful acts that must be balanced by future motivators. See, this means receiving harm in the future that one feels they themselves deserve to balance what they have done. And this is something that we've kind of worked into our reality agreements unknowingly. And again, this is why we call it spirit traps, because this wasn't what we were intending to do. Most of the traps that have been laid as essentially a co-creation of ourselves and others, and then have fallen into them ourselves. Traps that we didn't intend to fall into are the traps that we're now in. So this, having committed a harmful act, an individual also will start to hold out or withdraw their communication with various individuals, groups, or entire areas of existence. And so this whole systematic sequence, again, it can very well be, and most likely is, taking place unknowingly, because the original, the alpha thought, the postulate for such automated mechanisms were put in play by self as reality agreements a long time ago, we won't even say time, long ago on the backtrack. And so before we can begin processing these areas, it's important for us to understand how individuals get entangled into such spirit traps in the first place. So the subject of reality and existence are approached somewhat indirectly on this pathway. Our understanding of what is and the nature of our participation with reality improves as we progress along here. Participation in this shared universe is quite similar to our experiences of the many shared universes that have preceded it. This reality is a shared illusion created by the alpha spirit, the individual themselves that is experiencing it. This is always the case. And even before Alpha Spirit shared their creation illusions with others, and simply created in the isolation, of their own personal home universe for self. So the individual is in essence always still creating the universe in which they occupy. It's just a matter of how many other agreements about that creation have been superimposed since the point where we were pretty much just running this kind of stuff on our own for our own purposes, long ago. So, and although the Alpha Spirit is the ultimate creator of their own reality, there is a separation or fragmentation inherent from the beginning in order to experience that created reality or illusion without basically having a total identification with everybody else's. So that's one of those things, and so there's already barriers and so forth in place when we, even though we may share that universe with others. So in any case, and I know it's becoming an old record here, but in any case, communication, again, underlying factor in establishing, maintaining reality agreements concerning a shared universe. So to maintain individuality, we must see the whole as a system fragmented into parts, which then they communicate with each other, across a perceived distance. And we talked about that when we were in level 0 about communication. So the continuous experience, however, of reality or a universe, any existence, is maintained by a continuous communication among those that are actually sharing in that universe. So this sounds philosophical up to the point we start processing it out. So bear with me here. In the most material sense, communication is a motion, an action, or a relay of a particle or data from a source point to a receipt point. And we talked about that, but it's that motion that gives us this concept of time. And what we're mostly concerned with communication, we talked about perfect duplication or the copying of things. So when we're talking about reality and the spirit traps of which we've gotten into, which are also a part of the reality agreements, we're talking about a continuous communication of this, all of this taking place. And again, a lot of it unknowingly. So we treated communication before as, in terms of what's been said or whatnot. But again, I was trying to also illustrate that it's a model for pretty much any energetic flow. So in a shared universe or reality, an individual alpha spirit is still creating from within their own personal universe. But those creations now include a duplication of shared experiences. So both the source role and effect role are created as a reality within the personal universe of each individual sharing the interaction. And that is the reason why we defragment circuits, because your participation in the continuous creation and recording of this universe is including all flows on those channels. So we're talking, let's see, an alpha spirit is already experiencing some degree of fragmentation knowingly simply by engaging in a shared universe. This is what allows for simultaneous and individual and the shared experience. The duplication factor allows for one to get a sense of or a feel of both sides of a communication, even to duplicate the opposite role. And there's a constant interaction or communication with others and our environment every day. And so imprinting from all these interactions, it's not necessarily persistently compulsively created as part of our more permanent reality agreements. Therefore, it may not all be a significant source of spiritual fragmentation that requires defragmentation. The primary factor on determining all this and why the education is coupled with the processing is to expedite one's progress along the journey. We have to focus on the particular areas for them that they're either unwilling to confront or unwilling to accept, and then to process those to a point of where they can be freely handled. So the do unto others, idea as a golden rule has existed for thousands of years, but it's failed to protect the human condition. And it's failed to perfect it, it's failed to elevate and bring it to an ascension. So we're interested in the entire experience from, also someone else's viewpoint when processing any aspect, any incident, any of the areas of turbulence, using the circuits to basically handle all the viewpoints. It's when we apply that to the golden rule, and we don't have some fancy axiom for that. Do unto others as you'd want them to do unto you has not worked, is not effective. So it's, the harm comes on if that particular, who cares if you'd like it? The harm comes as if the harm is done to the viewpoint or the existential sphere of existence that is, apart from just yourself. So that golden rule obviously needs some correcting, because again, 2 millennia of that hasn't done it. Now, the real fragmentation begins to accumulate, and then of course our awareness is increasingly entangled. When an individual becomes unwilling to experience the effect that they've created, meaning of course unwilling to confront the viewpoint of the opposing role. So again, that's when we talk about acceptance, rejection, tendencies, automation, and what's inhibiting us. The unwillingness to actually experience those effects is a source of fragmentation as well. So let's just get into some basic techniques, try and move ourselves through this, keep moving. Let's do lightly here. Recall a time that was pleasant for both you and someone else. Then imagine the experience from their viewpoint. So here, of course, since we're dealing with gradient scales and we're catering to the solo pilot, that we're trying to keep them kind of clear of a lot of significant turbulence in the progress, we just start with something light and the basic ability of recall and imagine. And something pleasant. And this is just simply trying to get a sense of something that happened that is very easy to confront because of course it was, pleasurable, and then getting the idea of it happening but from the other individual's viewpoint. Or if you want to keep working, up with this, you can, if it's a large event or something, you could work with various individuals' viewpoints or whatever. So all we're trying to do is imagine or duplicate impressions that would be getting from a viewpoint other than what one is compulsively used to treating it. So when we speak of harmful acts, we mean when someone was harmed. So it doesn't matter what the circumstances for it. We're not talking about whether it was intentional or accidental and self-defense. We're not interested in any justifications or reasons behind it. Something that was encoded, imprinted, or stored in memory where harm was done. That's all that's necessary for treating it with systematic processing. So mainly just the unwillingness to confront the action and the experience of its effects. We talked about the balancing that's been kind of put into an agreement with this idea of karma. We got to come up with a better word for karma in systemology. But without processing, see, one of the things that gets us out of the traps is also a prevention for getting back into them. And without processing, a lot of this stuff that's left unhandled lingers with us and can manifest against us in the future. So generally, that's probably what's taking place when people, again, are talking about karma. It's stuff that they've done, and then they hold on to it, and have all this turbulence attached to it, worried others are going to find out, worried this, that, and the other. And then, of course, all of that, that ends up being the kind of manifestation that they end up experiencing in their reality, in the existence around us. See, so we're always creating reality. We're trying to systematically work out how to do it like effectively well. and be well-abled individuals again, and so on and so forth. But see, we've never stopped doing this. We're just finally figuring out what the hell it is we've been doing. So it's taken a while. In systematic processing, the effects, this idea that the effects of these things that we have done, it can be run out or processed out so that the individual is no longer unknowingly or continuously maintaining that fragmentation on their life track. So much of the kind of stuff we're talking about, this kind of karmic fragmentation, it lies dormant for long periods of time. And that's why we seldom see or experience those instantaneous repercussions of actions, those balancing effects. There's other ways in which they're removed from, people block them out, just like on the other side of fragmentation, and so it just kind of lays dormant there for quite a long time. The danger there being, again, just like with other forms of imprinting and fragmentation, something along the course of one's lifetime is bound to stir it up. And without having full awareness and so forth on it, it's going to trigger a whole chain of reactions that self has already agreed to down the line, and then of course the individual is not going to even understand what's going on and not have any control and so forth. And so this is what's been happening on a cumulative pattern along our spiritual timelines, brought us down pretty far. Now, as you begin to process more specific or direct, things in this area, it's still best to, we started with things that are pleasant just as practice, but it's best to start with kind of the lighter experiences. Now, in this case, when we're talking about systematic processing, we want to locate or spot a specific instance in memory where you caused someone else harm. It doesn't have to be a particularly significant harmful act at first. It's usually something that which you later regretted, if you have any sense about it that way, or something, as minor even as just hurting someone else's feelings, so to speak. It's simply about action. We're really targeting action, but the most effective, and we're trying to do this as like a fast track to ascension. The most effective actions that require our attention are the ones that are, again, fall under the category of harmful acts. So. Now, in the most basic method of confronting action, it would be what we were doing before, just the experience from the other person's viewpoint, getting a sense of how they felt at the time. Now, in order to achieve any kind of release or relief from the exercise, you might need to alternate between viewpoints, spotting your actions from your own viewpoint and spotting the event and sensations experiences from the other viewpoint. And alternating between alternation should be something you're fairly familiar with at this point. And we've done some practice with viewpoints, both in this lesson and in lesson 5. So yeah, you kind of see how this is all working out and why we got it worked out this way. But if this process makes things seem more heavy or solid, as opposed to a sense of relief being achieved, then it's likely that any turbulence or fragmentation is tied strongly to a similar type of incident that happened prior to it, so previous on the backtrack. And if this earlier incident can be located, then the same process is just kind of run on that action or event in terms of viewpoint. So in the case of a harmful act where the victim was not present, such as like vandalism or something, a seeker can just imagine the scenario and subsequent feelings like the other person might have had upon discovering it or something like that. So just progressively work your way through whatever's easily recalled with this first pass of the material. I've already warned you, you'll be running through levels 0 to 4 or various parts of them, several times for beta defragmentation and also for stabilizing it later on. So just hit on what you can deal with, or what comes into play, or comes into view, and then don't struggle too much with it. You'll have plenty of time to work past this again. So now, while we've emphasized the outflow, which is to say the harmful act itself, you committing it or doing the action, all viewpoints are duplicated from the imprinting incident. So that means like a victim can also pull in fragmentation of the opposing side and so forth. So we have to also make sure to treat all circuits on whatever it is, including things that have happened to you. We tend to, it's ironic, we work it this way. We found it far more effective to start actually building up one's ability to confront and actualized awareness by treating the things they have done before targeting the kind of your own confronting of the past incidents that have happened to you, the points where you're considering yourself on the receiving end or on the victim end. It just happens to work out this way. So, so again, just bear with me, keep with the materials, and let's see. And why don't we take a break? Okay, and some closing points here. We'll try and wrap up. We're just going to take a few minutes to wrap up level 2, and then we can actually get into level 3. Before the break, we were talking about escaping spirit traps. So it's important to note that these karmic mechanisms that we speak of, they're not the only reason that things happen. Just because someone acts against you does not mean you automatically deserved it as some kind of long-running tab of retribution. And while all actions have a certain cause and sequence behind them, everything that happens is not you just pulling some cosmic destiny in on your reality. You know, things can just happen. However, there is a particularly turbulent area, you know, if there is a particularly turbulent area that persists in spite of your basic efforts, as we talked about in this lesson and previous lessons that can all be used to target a certain area or terminal, then you know, this trap type of fragmentation could be part of what's at play with you, the type of trap, spirit trap that we talked about here. And again, that's all part of our reality agreements. So when processing these areas, particularly when flying solo, it's preferred to focus on the outflows regarding what you have done, because the greatest gains that are going to be achieved when processing, using our processing, is really about being at cause. So you know, at a certain point, we do also, again, confront the inflows and what's been done to us. But you know, running this too long, too early is, and without the alternation, even with the outflows, with what we've done, it actually has a tendency to emphasize being the effect. So that's one of the reasons, you know, I said we'd kind of, you know, sneak in some stuff here that's not in your textbooks about why we've done it this way. We do it this way because we introduce this, and then eventually we'll handle it, you know, on the other flows and be able to alternate between. But the kind of therapy where is just running too much on the flow of this has happened to me, this has happened to me, look what they did to me, this is the, it is actually, it has quite limiting not only therapeutic effect, but limiting for any kind of like spiritual progress, like what we're trying to achieve with this. So this is when we get to that point, which is actually in level 4, you know, and confronting the stuff that has happened to us is an integral part and almost the capstone of beta defragmentation. But again, we're working towards that. This way, by the time we start treating those things, we're treating the things that are of utmost significance to us. A lot of the things that we might handle early on, the pathway that's in that direction, a person would spend a considerable amount of time with it, and again, we'd be working on that flow for too long, and as a result, consistently validating them as being the effect. Now, when the point is that we introduce that type of processing at level 4, an individual has already worked themselves up to a certain point of actualized awareness. Certain areas are handled much more fluidly, much more easily, and we don't need to we can target specific significant incidents, and not the fact that for, you know, zillions of years the alpha spirit has become more accumulatively the effect of its environment, because that's already a given. We know that. But in order to actually make this an effective pathway to ascension within one's lifetime, and that means something that can be done in a matter of years, not even the kind of monk dribble about being on a mountainside for 30 years. We're talking about real actualization, real ability here. So this is the way we have to do it. In the goal of Systemology Level 2, in combination with the processing from the previous levels, all being basically combined as now where you're at Level 2, is for a seeker to release themselves from the heavier energetic burdens that they carry as a spiritual being, that which is most accessible to process at this stage of the pathway. And we mean, of course, the unraveling or dissolving of energetic masses that entangle an individual's spiritual awareness into the fixed solidity of fragmentation. So now I mentioned a bit about holdouts and holdbacks, and that's basically, this is what hostile acts are, the actions we've done, which then lead to holdouts or holdbacks, which is essentially a withdrawal. So a miscalculated or a missed effort or whatever, the reach that was happening on one creative level was deemed like that it should never take place or never be duplicated again, which then resulted in holdouts or holdbacks in that area. And this is how a spiritual being kind of eventually brought themselves down to a lower and lower level of ability. So withholding things is one way that our awareness becomes entangled and then, of course, unavailable to us. So we don't mean simply not saying or not doing something, but when attention is actually actively applied in order to restrain oneself from such things, then we're actually holding back ourselves and unknowingly in other ways too. So a holdback on action and ability generally begins with a holdout on communication. So there we finally get to the point where it's like, oh, what's the difference? A holdout is a communication, which also includes holdbacks on actions. Actions are also communications. So again, they're kind of two of a pair there. So an example of this might be to hold out on one's true opinion of something in order to spare someone's feelings. Another might be to hold out sharing something that would be socially inappropriate or unacceptable. And then most critically, there's the holding out of communicating out of guilt, of fear, of punishment. So in a shared universe, all these are actual examples where an individual goes out of communication with other terminals and with other spheres of existence within that created universe. So we've processed outflows. Let's see, practice. We've talked about confession. Now, one of the things that an individual could do also, and this is again a practice that can be done for solo, it's called the confessional letter. And this would be kind of a way that an individual, it's another applied way of practicing what we were talking about with other viewpoints. But of course it isn't, okay, so real quickly, it isn't something that someone would send either. So it's really a matter of therapeutic value there, seeing it external from oneself and so forth. Let's see, turbulence attached to various harmful acts increases with the amount of intention that an individual places on it internally, basically to keep it in check. And this is why before the break, I was talking about, the things that we worry about someone finding out about. There's a lot of awareness and attention, zoo, as we call it. It's suspended or fixated on those things. And the sense that it's an internalization of energy where we kind of pull in what we don't want in our lives because we're having to hold it back, kind of build up these walls about it. We're not being free and rid of it. It's being compulsively created, and yet we don't want it, and yet there we have it. So this is why we have to defragment to get rid of these things, and why, of course, this area is so critical. And the same way, like I was talking about with the karma, or even multiple lifetimes down the way, there's a lot of reactive mechanisms that take place. For example, anytime an individual is confronted by something that reflects or reminds them of something that they're worried about, or something that they're worried is going to be found out. So we address this now at our present gradient, level 2 on the pathway, because um, should anything similar to what we're describing get restimulated in any of the processing that we start doing, then we handle it with processing, before any further type of work is handled on the pathway. So um, it's the simple fact that when we're doing systematic processing, that something just suddenly appears and it's in our face and our attention is on it, that in and of itself shows that it's a source of fragmentation, and that we have to get it under one's self-control. So that's what we're trying to treat here. And so that's why I have to be somewhat general, and the PCL, the command lines used in the processing, are worded the way they are, because it's the way in which it is applied is going to be very specific to each individual. So you just kind of have to know the whole subject, especially if you're solo piloting. So, and as I said, this lesson marks the completion of Systemology Level 2. And this is a critical checkpoint. So even though we're going to continue on, we're just going to continue the education of Level 3 and so forth with the next lessons here. This is a point where, whether in traditional piloting or the checks and whatnot, or with a solo pilot, where you might cycle back to the beginning of the professional course lessons to PC1 and just process through a second pass of all the materials up until now, so 0, 1, and 2. Now, ideally, a seeker that has fully completed Systemology Level 2 will have a much greater and more stable certainty on being an alpha spirit that is having a human experience. Now, this certainty should be at such a level as to prevent the seeker from so easily being trapped in the problems of the human condition thereafter. That means that the education and the processing between processing level 0 and 2 should be, and this is why we say to go back to the beginning and do it again. By this point, you want it to be a stable realization point for you, that although there may be many other areas that need to be handled, various specifics and terminals that are, have still yet to come up, and so forth, that having this body of knowledge, having the knowledge of the fundamentals of systemology, the basic course information, having the knowledge of systematic processing and the work that's done through now 6 professional course lessons, that this knowledge is stable for you. You're not getting any worse, that you're able to handle the basics of not only the subject but of life, the basics again. So, by this, again, we don't mean that a seeker is going to be completely broken free of the human condition. You're still likely to experience emotional fluctuation with daily life, but it's not as likely to entangle you as much as perhaps it once did, and you have a better understanding of how the human game is being played at in this world and how to handle it, at least well enough to continue along the pathway. So again, this is where we've had some kind of fall away on the wayside, the ability to first handle, again, the doingness factor and the willingness to do, and the willingness to confront, and so forth. So now, just for fun, we'll close with the following exercise. Close your eyes, spot places where you are not, spot many places. Now, we say our goal is covertly embedded in the PCL here. Now, that means that what is the idea here? And so I just threw that at you as a thing, but so we need to understand that by the end of this processing level, okay, the alpha spirit is not actually located anywhere. It's simply part of our game. And in this existence, to pretend to be in the locations from which we perceive or operate is an inherent part of the game. So the PCL for this exercise: close your eyes, spot places where you're not. Do this repeatedly, spot many places, okay? Now, by checking that you are not there, by spotting a place where you are not, you actually put attention on it to look at it. And so you're transferring or projecting, if you prefer, some degree of personal awareness to that location, which is, again, exterior, completely exterior to the body. And the PCL, it doesn't limit where these places are. They're spotted by attention with eyes closed. They don't need to be considered nearby. And it's repeated until there is at least some sense of exterior zoo vision that's achieved. And we talked about some zoo vision. And again, at this processing level, we're not really concerned about perceptions and vividness and accurateness. We just want an individual to get an increased sense of their spiritual ability. And so again, when you've gotten to this point and you cycle back to level 0 and go through all that information and thought, emotion, communication, go through level 1 on the protest problems, help and so forth, and then level 2 and do all the objective exercises, and then continue on to level 3 with professional course lesson 7.
The Joshua Free imprint, JFI Publications, in conjunction with Mardukite Academy and the Systemology Society, present the single greatest breakthrough of the 21st century for all humanity: the perfection of a new standard systemology, a complete map for the way out from the bottom to the top, and your key to being an ascended master in this lifetime. Everything you need is contained in 3 progressive, self-guiding courses: the Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course, the Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, and the Keys to the Kingdom Advanced Training Course. And each should be studied and applied in their intended sequence and order as displayed in this video. All 3 courses combined are available as 5 standard hardcover volumes, but also as 33 installments, since each single course lesson is also available individually as a pocket-sized manual. The Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course includes Being More Than Human, Realities in Agreement, Windows to Experience, Ancient Systemology, A History of Systemology, and Systemology Processing. The Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, including processing levels 0 through 6, includes in Volume 1, Increasing Awareness, Thought and Emotion, Clear Communication, Handling Humanity, Free Your Spirit, Escaping Spirit Traps, Eliminating Barriers, and Conquest of Illusion. The Pathway to Ascension Volume 2 includes Confronting the Past, Lifting the Veils, Spiritual Implants, Games and Universes, Spiritual Energy, Spiritual Machinery, The Arcs of Infinity, and Alpha Thought. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 7 in Volume 1 includes The Secret of Universes, Games, Goals, and Purposes, The Jewel of Knowledge, Implanted Universes, and the supplementals Systemology Biofeedback and Systemology Procedures. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 8 in Volume 2 includes Entities and Fragments, Spiritual Perception, Mastering Ascension, Advancing Systemology, and the AT Supplement Systemology Piloting. All titles are available from your favorite bookseller. Explore new standard systemology today, and may you never be the same.